A very good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and thank you so much for joining us. I want to welcome you to the AI for Social Good Summit, which is a month-long gathering of experts and practitioners on artificial intelligence, on topics of governance, policymaking. I'm really looking at how do we build the skills and capabilities in this space? How can governments in Asia leverage artificial intelligence, not just to prevent some of the potential risks, but also for social good? Now, today's session is a session I'm really excited about. It's on multi-stakeholder collaboration. And the reason that we're doing this session is because we know that building policy, creating regulation around artificial intelligence for social good cannot be done solely by the private sector, but it also cannot be done solely by government. We need multi-stakeholder collaborations to make that happen. And we have a fantastic panel of people who have been working both across the private sector and the public sector in actually building these multi-stakeholder collaborations. So we're going to be learning a little bit from them about some of the pitfalls, the challenges, but also how they've addressed some of those challenges. Now, the summit, the AI for Social Good Summit, is a program that has been developed by Google, United Nations SCAP, and APRU in partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation. And so we've got a number of events happening. We're about halfway through the month now. We have a number of events happening, continuing throughout the month. Now, if you'd like to go deeper into some of these topics, we have this report, which you can download from the website, the APRU AI for Social Good Summit website. I got lots of fantastic pieces in there. How do we write ethics and Buddhism into artificial intelligence, but also some really practical things about, what are some of the policy considerations when it comes to working with government and regulating AI for social good. So in terms of our program today, we're going to take a few minutes just to meet each other. And so what's going to happen is we're going to put everyone in a few moments, we're going to put everyone into some smaller breakouts so you can get the chance to meet everyone. We're going to do a moderated discussion and Q&A with our panel. And then for those of you who have signed on to join a country breakout at the end of the session, so after 12:30 Hong Kong time, we're going to be doing country breakouts. Today, possibly we'll be doing breakouts with India, Philippines, Thailand, and Korea. So if you are from one of those countries, stick around and we will be able to add you into those breakouts. So what we're going to do next is we're going to head into breakouts. We're going to take 8 minutes for this, but the group that has come together today is, I think, a very special group. All of you have an interest in multi-stakeholder collaboration, which, if you think about it, is a pretty unique thing, right? Not that many people you run out into the streets are interested in multi-stakeholder collaboration when it comes to artificial intelligence. So I say, let's take a few moments to meet each other and to get to know some of the different people in the room. As you go into the breakouts, I'll ask you to do two things. One is introduce yourself. Where are you located? What's your organization, your role? Just do a quick introduction. And two is maybe you can share a little bit about what is your interest in this area. Have you done some work in this space? Are you planning on doing some work in this space around multi-stakeholder collaboration? So those will be the two things. So introduce yourself and tell the group a little bit about what your interest is in this space. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to head out into those breakouts in 3, 2, and 1. And welcome back, everyone. So I hope you had the chance to meet some interesting folks as part of the session. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to hand things over to our lively moderator for our discussion, Dr. P. Anandan. He's the CEO of the Wadhwani Institute for Artificial Intelligence in India. He was the founder and managing director of Microsoft Research India and also a professor of computer science at Yale University. Anandan will be moderating our session today. Over to you, Anandan.
Yeah, thanks, Carl, and thanks APRU for giving me this opportunity. It's actually been a great pleasure. I participated in the inaugural session, feels like almost a month ago or something now, but I'm glad this is getting along. I've also been able to participate in reviewing the proposals and such. Yeah, I won't say more because there is a panel that I think we are all eager to hear from. But my background actually is an AI scientist. I've had 40 years of experience working in AI, worked in academia, industry, and now finally in the social sector. Very, very excited about what we are doing now, namely trying to bring the power of AI-based technological innovations to poor and underserved communities throughout the world. Let me request other panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Dr. David Hardoon, please.
Well, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. My name is David Hardoon. I'm currently based out of Singapore due to the worldwide situation, because in fact, I'm supposed to be out in the Philippines. I work with the Aboitiz Group, and specifically the Union Bank of the Philippines, where I'm their senior advisor for AI and data and AI. Maybe just very briefly, and following from the breakout rooms, the context, my background is I was the first chief data officer for the Monetary Authority of Singapore. Hence my interest, affinity, and workings when it comes to industry and multi-party policy and development when it comes to AI. Thank you.
Let me request Professor Jay Moon to introduce himself. Thanks, David.
Well, I'm Jay Moon. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Dean of the College of Social Sciences, Yonsei University in Seoul, Korea. And my academic background, public administration and government, and I'm particularly interested in digital government and application of ICTs in the public sector. And I'm director of the Institute of Future Government, so that I'm interested in AI applications in the for the government services and social benefits. So I look forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Let me request Puneet Shukla to introduce himself.
Thank you, Anandan. Great pleasure to be here. So I am Puneet Shukla. I'm based out of India, and I currently am affiliated with the World Economic Forum, working on similar mandated projects where we bring together governments, enterprises, civic societies, and academicians to co-design and co-develop regulatory frameworks for emerging technology. So we are part of this group called Center for Fourth Industrial Revolution, where AI is a major part of the technology platform which the World Economic Forum focuses on. Before this, I have also been associated with the Government of India. I was part of the team which worked on developing the national strategy for artificial intelligence for the country. And it's quite particularly interesting to see the topic of the conference and the panel here, that we tried to follow similar mechanisms of collaborative regulation for AI in that process. So good to be here, and I'm looking forward to learning from rest of the experts.
Thank you, Puneet. Let me request Dr. Kanchana Wanickon to tell us about herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kanchana Wanickon. I'm Vice President of Office of Higher Education Science Research and Innovation Policy Councils based in Bangkok, Thailand. I am a policymaker. I have involved in development of research strategy, human resource development, in particular higher education. And recently I've been involved in development of national AI strategy of Thailand. We're looking to using AI as a new mechanism for addressing national challenges, social and economic, and also building up digital transformation in AI economy. I'm looking forward for the discussion today.
Yeah. Thank you, Kanchana. So I think the way we're going to do it is I will first give a little bit of background from our own experience, my work on this topic of multi-stakeholder governance and regulation and such. And then ask each of the panelists to speak on the same topic from their own experience and perspective. So see, we have been an institute about 2.5 years now. And very quickly, when we first came into this foray, we realized that to actually develop technology solutions for this purpose of serving underserved communities like poor people, often in rural areas, sometimes in urban areas. But I would say about half the world population probably belongs to them. But these are people who have not really benefited from the power of AI in the way we are all beginning to see. They're not interested in self-driving cars or robots, or for that matter, manufacturing solutions where AI might be helpful, or certainly e-commerce and so forth. The most probably widely used technology in terms of where AI might be playing a role is in using a cell phone and messaging apps and things like that. But that really doesn't address most of their needs of life. And what we discovered is that because there is not a lot of business opportunity, typical commercial companies, either large companies, technology companies, or startups, are not really playing in this domain and don't have the capacity to make the kind of change that is needed. Yet the problems are real, and the problems both happen at the personal, individual level, like pregnancy risk for mothers, or farmers' various problems from soil management to inventory or pest management, and public health, or public sector domains where it's not for an individual. And we often find that the only entity throughout the world in different countries that is capable of scaling any solution that is developed is really the government, because the private sector organizations don't have the reach. The government is the primary and often the only caretaker. But there are a wide variety of social sector organizations, traditional not-for-profits, NGOs, that have a deep amount of engagement and know how things work, and they are capable of delivering the solution. So fundamentally, the problem is a triangular collaboration between technology innovators, governments, and social sector organizations. And the technology innovators are actually the newcomer to this dialogue, because the governments and social sector organizations have done it. Yet the capacity to understand data, which is of course the primary requirement in order to do this, really lies with the technology organizations. So if you're thinking about any kind of regulation, any kind of governance, it requires the ability to have the conversation, but it also requires the technology organizations to build standardized frameworks and solutions, but in a way that they can properly identify the safety risks and the impact opportunities. But then the governments have to take action. But ultimately, given that the solutions may be delivered through the social sector organizations, they will know on the ground what is really feasible and not feasible. I mean, you may have some great idea about data collection from every mother or farmer, but in reality, such things don't get used for a variety of systemic reasons. And the social sector partners know what are the incentives and what are the ways in which things can be made to work. So what we found is that before coming to actual regulation, we actually think about the ways in which data and solutions can be managed, and then how the three parties have to partner in this. So let me stop there for the beginning. That's our experience. I'm going to ask the various participants. I'll again go roughly in alphabetical order. And the same question, what is your experience from your own work and domain? So to start with, David, can you share some experiences and that in your own experience, but also where things might have gone wrong as places where we need to learn how to do things better?
Thank you again. I'll try to answer that question, which is quite a full encompassing one in a succinct manner. So my experience, having been in a position, specifically in my previous role as being Chief Data Officer at the Monetary Authority of Singapore, where, just for the sake of everyone who may not be aware, in Singapore, the Monetary Authority is effectively everything to do with finance for Singapore, be it the central bank, the integrated financial regulator, as well as the financial development hub. So it's really the center and melting pot, but it's different arms. So the role kind of had the two dimensions of really working with the industry as well as with other government agencies, both within the country as well as external, in terms of really delivering and driving both developmental as well as policy controls when it comes to AI. Now, the reason I wanted to mention that, just to give the context of some of my experience and the work that's been done, the stories. So where you would find, and I'll deliberately start with the challenges, is that it's absolutely critical, and this is from my own personal experience, to not presume that everyone around the table is looking at things from the same perspective. And I'll give you two views. One is from the cross kind of public-private sector type of engagement, whereby the public sector, being the the government point of view, is rarely looks at it from a P&L, from a commercialization point of view. It usually has a larger context associated from a stability perspective, from a inclusion point of view, and whatnot. Now, again, obviously very relevant and existential concerns. But from a commercial perspective, it is exactly that, commercial. Now, while there's an intention and desire to do good, as with the topic of today, is that ultimately there needs to be a mechanism of contextualizing it and how does it fit with the larger business context. Now, again, however obvious this may be, not paying attention to that can cause small dissonances in the conversation, in discussion, in terms of alignment. I'll give you a very simple example of that. I remember I was involved in an initiative that was looking at long-term application of AI over the course of 5 years, and very kind of blue sky, very horizon scanning, and so forth. However, from a business-centric point of view, 5 years is, it's an eternity. It was very difficult to concretize it to, well, what is it that we're trying to do? How do we bring it back in terms of the implementation to an application point of view? How does it tie back into the business? And it was a necessity to kind of get to that realization and then say, well, okay, while we're interested in the 5-year, how do we break it down into smaller chunks? And the second one, which I thought was really important to highlight, and again, from my own experience, and this is applicable in any sense, perhaps more so in public to public or multi-agencies, is what's the saying is, everyone's child is no one's child. It's absolutely critical to have someone take charge, to take lead, to kind of be a central nervous system, specifically when it comes to data, because data has so many different facets and perspectives, to saying, well, what is the objectives? How do we address the existing policy concern? For example, the sharing of data amongst agencies. So the key message there is that while it is absolutely critical and important to have that multifaceted approach and have multi-conversation, is that it's important to have someone to ultimately lead the pack, to drive the conversation and to drive the discussion. Now, I'll stop there because I don't want to take more time from the rest, but this is some of the experiences and some of the key elements of my personal experience.
Yeah, thank you, David. I'm going to ask Professor Jay, and you have studied, both from an academic and other points of view, and the question is, how does the structure of an initiative itself influence how it's done in terms of governance and other different ways to do for different kinds of structures?
Well, I think the topic for today, multi-stakeholder collaboration in the area of AI, is very compelling and very timely. And it seems to me that multi-stakeholder collaboration is a must, not an optional, in hammering out AI ethics, particularly because AI includes multiple actors in its lifestyle, from designing, development, deployment, and usages. In each stages, there are various stakeholders, including academics, people like you, and industry, consumer groups, nonprofit organizations, of course. As you mentioned, government, public sector is very, very important, and also international organizations. There are also different levels, such as individual level, organizational group level, and local government, national government, and global communities. All stakeholders are important. Based on my experiences as part of the research group, AI for Social Good, organized by APRU and funded by Google. And there are, my part was basically governance, and I tried to look at different stakeholders involving in shaping out the ethical guidelines and regulatory frameworks. It seems to me it's very important because they're all we are dealing with uncertainty and risk. And recently, as you all know, the Amazon's facial recognition system forcibly matched 28 Congress members with the mugshots, and you all probably get that news. And I think it indicates the risk and dangers of AI-based systems. At the same time, of course, we know that there are a lot of benefits we can receive. So that it's very important to shape out the ethical guidelines and legal and regulatory frameworks. It seems to me that there is easy agreement among stakeholders in terms of principles and values. We all easily agree on those. But there are disagreements when we get into policy and priorities, specific regulations, and then degree of regulations. There easily we can get the disagreements. To me, there are two positions. One is it's very common that government is often reactive, so that reactive position suggesting that governments are often reactive and rather than proactively responding to the possible dangers and risk. Another position is a paternalistic approach, which I mean that governments play a very active role like a parent in preventing any possible problems, which often lead to over-regulations. So that here, reactive positions and then paternalistic approach, and many countries are in between. And the question is, what would be the social consensus? And to reach that social consensus, multi-stakeholder dialogues and consensus building mechanisms are very, very critical. And I think that's very, very important. And of course, the social risk tolerance in a society really matters, so that the ethical criteria in one country is not necessarily true in another country or acceptable in another country. And whose positions, industries' voices, and civic groups and researchers and government positions are all different. So that I think it's that's the way to go. But I think in the course of reaching the consensus will be thorny sometimes. And I think that's a challenge that we all face. Let me stop here and then I'll talk about those later.
Thanks, dear. Puneet, I'm going to hold you for a minute because I think there are some interesting questions that have come up, which you could respond from a government perspective. So let me go to Kanchana. There may be more such things as well. Again, from your experience, Kanchana, on particular initiatives that you might have been a part of, where things might have worked, might not have. Yeah.
Thank you. I talk from my own experience in AI. It starts from developing research and human resource development program, under our National Research and Innovation Policy Framework. And it sort of grow organically. We start with what kind of courses, human capacity development, and in particular to serve the private sector. In Thailand, AI application is, the private sector has taken the lead, and they request human resource, in particular, and data. So start from there, and then the research community have worked with the private sector on some of the new application development. So start with the two on human capacity building and research innovation program. And then it sort of grow organically that if we were to have research and HRD program on AI, why not doing a national AI strategy? So from research, you need data, you need infrastructure. So we need to do planning on high performance computing, what kind of capability, sharing model, and the stakeholder has expand, to a larger communities. And when you look at the application, there's implication on social, uh, uh, aspect of that. The ethical and legal aspect sort of coming in. So it's expand to, this LC, ethical, legal, and social implication, and it has the broad context and also sector-specific context. And last but not least, there are also investment and promotion. So there are platforms of discussing this here and there, and at the end of the day, people say it's a time for the government jump in and trying to come up with a central platform so all these different stakeholders can discuss together. Spearhead by the research communities, we talk to the government sectors, from my ministry, higher education side, research innovation, and also digital economy industry. Start from there. And the first thing that was quite challenging in managing different multi-stakeholder engagement is to set a goal, a shared vision. And we agree that if we were to have national AI strategy, we should address at least three aspects, have three goals. One is on human resource development, also including upskill, reskill, and developing new skill for future of work from AI. And also on the economic aspect, providing opportunity and support for tech startups and new digital business from AI. And last but not least is using AI as tools or platform to solve social challenging issues, and also it touch upon national securities as well, data protection, and all sort of things that on social aspects. So it takes some time to get people to agree on, okay, these are the three goals, and then the five aspects that I has mentioned, starting with human resource development, research and innovation, infrastructure, which on the research and also on the usage, on the LC aspect, and investment and promotion. And now we are developing this sort of a broad-based strategy, government intervention on all different aspects, and also looking at sector-specific like agriculture, health, tourism, energy, and education, and national security. So that's sort of like my experience, and I agree with all the participants that you need a good balance, and definitely you need to involve different stakeholders, and you need someone that sort of take the lead in coordinating all these efforts and making sure that there are good division of labor among all these stakeholders. So I'll stop here, and I can give you more example in the second round. Thank you.
Thanks, Kanchana. Puneet, I guess I'm going to put you a bit on the spot. You've been both working from within the government and now looking from outside. The questions that have come up with respect to how can government not be, say, perhaps reactive and not be paternalistic? How can it play a convening role? And what are the challenges in terms of identifying the right players? If you could speak from some of your experience, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I think what Professor Moon also talked about, being reactive in terms of regulation, is a consistent regulation problem in almost all governments, and it happens in AI regulation or technology regulation as well. So I think in terms of identifying the right stakeholders, there are some mechanisms in government of India which I have experienced are quite progressive, because I mean, at least in terms of driven process driven addressing those sets of challenges is quite there. So for example, the idea of public consultation in almost every policy review before it is actually enacted is there generally in almost every set of policy reforms which the government conducts, and it's there in technologies related policy drafting as well. So public consultation itself is a good process to ensure that your policy reflects the concerns raised by the general public at large. However, what is important is to also understand, especially in the field of emerging technology regulation, is that the governments generally do not have the right capacity to really understand long-term implications of what this technology could be. So that's why these identified set of experts need to be really engaged, who need to assess that there is a what could be the long term impact of that technology policy which you are currently drafting. And what Kanchana also spoke about is the idea of whether long term research in AI within the country needs to be incentivized. What would be the impact on overall job growth, the productivity of the economy, and how could those ideas could really gel in well with what you really want to do within through that technology. So I think identification of such experts who really understand the multiplier impact of that policy is really required. And that's where I think a multiple stakeholder group generally gives you almost all the perspectives to think about, and it ensures the risks and risks are moderated to an extent that you can manage in the long term, and it gives you all the perspectives within that domain. So I think one examples which I really faced during the AI strategy formulation in the government of India itself is that how do we differentiate between the role of government as an enabler or implementer. So, Dr. Anandan, you yourself are working on areas within healthcare and agriculture, and in those areas, government is the largest provider of services within the country. So, how do you go about differentiating government's role from just an enabler of policy formulation or technology development within that space, and where does it draw a line between uh, itself being the major provider of services using a technology in that domain. So I think that line is very hard to define because it can completely differ from sector to sector, domain to domain, and India has a wide diversity in terms of mm, uh, subjects on which governments have control over. State governments have their own ways to take call on it. So I think these challenges are definitely there. Uh, what is required in governments is to have a very open approach towards co-development of regulation, and I think that's a long term change which would be required in almost every government which we see, and we have seen that happening in last 5 or 7 years. I think an open approach towards talking about regulation, what they want to do, what are the priorities of the government very clearly in a long term basis. I think those changes have happened. You look at the ways in which regulatory authority of India conducts its public consultations. They're very well managed and have a very clear timeline on the basis of which the ideas around internet regulation, those ideas are spread around the country and talked about. So I was recently a part of the conversation group which Ministry of Agriculture were talking about, where we conducted a peer review with experts, where we could discuss a digital agriculture framework and how could that really mean to the rest of the stakeholders. So I think the processes in terms of uh, ensuring that the regulation is open is talked about in a completely open manner, and then clearly placing the interests of the government, long-term views of the government on the table with the rest of the stakeholders, that these are the large goals which the government wants to achieve, and how can rest of the stakeholders could really play a role in achieving those goals. I think that set of drive from the government would be a great way to ensure that the collaborative development of regulation itself is beneficial to the overall ecosystem in the long run.
Thank you, Puneet. We are actually running down on time fast. I was going to have.
Can I add something?
Yes, please, please.
Well, I just want to add something on the government's efforts to putting together a regulatory framework on AI. I just want to talk about that there might be variations because of there is politics among different government agencies. So the government is not just one. For example, the Ministry of Industry and Trade might have very different positions from the Ministry of Science and ICTs. And also the people who, the agency which cares about the consumers. So that, I think there are politics in terms of shaping out regulatory framework, depending on the interest and major stakeholders of particular agencies. So that I think it's very important to have, we sort of separate from the moralizing AI stage and then regulating and legal framework stage. So that in the first stage, I think, the governing process should be as open as possible, so that try to incorporate different voices of different stakeholders. And then sort of moving toward the regulating stage. So that shift is very critical. And also, again, there are variations among different countries in terms of social tolerance for risk. So that's another consideration. In fact, and if you look at the autonomous vehicle regulations among different countries, for example, China, the social acceptance is very high, but the regulation and institutional support not necessarily same as the social acceptance for autonomous vehicles. And Korea, US institutional support is there, and then the regulation might be different. So that I think we should look at the specific elements of different policy positions of different agencies, as well as social risk tolerance.
Just to jump in for a second, and I'm conscious of time, so I'll be very brief. I just thought it'd be worthwhile mentioning, because it's literally hot off the press from yesterday. And building on from Puneet's as well as Jimun's points about how multi-parties come together, I think it's absolutely important to work in reverse. A lot of times there's a very defensive approach of, oh, these are the things that we need to guard. These are the things that we cannot relent. There's almost, especially when it comes to data, and as you're veering into more sensitive dimensions of privacy and ethics, put that aside from now. It's important to put those aside and work backwards. So just yesterday, BSP of the Philippines, Central Bank with Monetary Authority of Singapore have announced cross-border data connectivity when it comes to the financial sector. Now that's, if you think about it, an area which has been heatly different perspectives across the globe in terms of localization of data, governance, regulation, innovation. And here you're finding an ability from regulatory bodies to say, we're doing this while having the safeguards of supervision to spur innovation. So it's proof in the pudding that different agencies within the country with other agencies on a different country are able to put the objective, how do we collaborate? How do we spur innovation? And of course, with hygiene and safety, now what is it that we need to put in place? And a lot of times what you find is actually a lot of the stuff is already in place. It's just the recalibration associated with it. So I just want to mention that, because it's just also, like I said, off the press example of outcomes of such collaborations.
Thank you all, but there is quite a lot of topics to talk about, but we are down on time, and there has been very good discussion in the chat, and I hope people will read it. I was actually going to follow up some of those threads, but in the interest of time, let me just pick one question. See, there's been a lot of movement towards data privacy and regulating data usage, GDPR being the biggest example, but different countries have approached it. The question is, how is AI different in this case? I mean, should we just rely on whatever has been done for data as the final answer? Or is there more with respect to privacy and other types of fairness concerns and privacy concerns that would come as a result of AI going above the data aspect itself. I wonder if each of you could just make a quick comment on that, and then I think we're going to be out of time actually. So without maybe Kanchana, you hadn't spoken for a while. Maybe I'll start with you.
Yes, good question. I think different country has different contexts, and it's the role of government to sort of provide a platform for different stakeholders to agree on what are the right balance. And we are debating on whether we need a distributed sort of power or governance structure, or do we want to centralize governance structure. Even in Thailand, we still in discussion of this. In terms of data, it's critical for AI, and at the same time that we are driving on AI strategy and AI development, we are also have a new law on Personal Data Protection Act. And it's quite strict that in the law it did say that you need to specify what kind of application that you need the data for, which for the AI development aspect for innovation is sort of limit application, and it's a big debate. So so we can't sort of going through this balance, and it turned out that the government decided to delay the PDPA Act, so that from the innovation and promotion aspect, we have a good balance on this regulation. I don't have the clear answer to that, but we are going through this process of data governance for AI. And one thing that I would like to touch on this multi-stakeholder approach, and also on the privacy, is you need to raise awareness and understanding. There's a tendency of fears of technologies because of the concern of privacy. And I think it's the role of the government to get people engaged, and also having a platform to discuss on the development of technology on social implication. In particular, in Thailand, there's a lot of concern on jobs and future of work, and planning on upskill and reskill of human resources. So that's another thing. So it starts from data, privacy, fear of technology, and then concerns on job and security. So all these things are related.
So last word, I mean.
So my point, I think is.
Yeah, sorry, almost out of time. The question about how is AI governance and regulation different from data, from what your experience? I think we are almost out of time from what I can see, and maybe after Puneet speaks, we'll have to close the session.
Yeah, so briefly, Dr. Anandan, I think what's your question, I think it can be talked about in a manner that data protection is definitely important, which is being taken care of by either GDPR-like regulations which the country is following. But I think what is also important to focus is something called algorithmic bias or algorithmic fairness, and then which are on top of what data privacy protection regulations could look like. So I think that cannot be ignored by, I mean, we can't just say that since data protection is there in the country or in terms of regulation, it is somehow complied with. We don't need to focus on any other AI related regulations. But I think algorithmic bias or fairness needs also some amount of regulative focus. For example, I mean, the most relevant example which I can think of is probably the spread of fake news is actually highly correlated with how algorithmic push is given to specific sets of news or facts which are there in the social media. So I think that is a separate aspect which also needs to be focused by governments, which is on top of what data protection or privacy regulations could be about.
Okay. Yeah, I think from whatever my assessment, understanding about the session timing, we are pretty much there. So let me thank each of you, the panelists, and also very vigorous discussion in the chat. And I do want to make one comment that someone had said in the chat about how cultural groups can be, can use these for governance. I think, it's not really only a state problem. I think there's any kind of an institutional organization, to the extent that they can benefit from AI, should be looking at this. But it occurred to me there is another thought, right, which is a different way of looking at it, which is, AI can help us discover commonalities between different segments of people that transcend boundaries of, cultural groups or even states or even economic classes, and identify, where certain commonalities are, and that may be surprising to us. And I always think that when we think about governance, traditionally we take a top-down approach and breaking things into segments. And perhaps we have here a technology that can help us rethink governance through a process of discovery of what may be the real, aspects that goes beyond traditional boundaries of, of culture and people and so forth. Something to think about, a lot to do. And I really appreciate the panelists coming together and sharing their views. And thank you, APRU, and Google and the organizers for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anandan, and thanks very much to the whole panel for taking part. I really like your point on this idea that we're in a position where we're having to rethink governance. And really, that's what's making all of this sort of policy around the artificial intelligence space so challenging. Is we're rethinking all kinds of things. We're forced into rethinking all kinds of things as we are kind of considering and designing these policies. So let me get into what are some of the things that are going to be happening next. I mentioned at the very beginning that we will be doing country breakouts. So for those of you who are sticking around for country breakouts, we have 3 breakouts for India, Thailand, and the Philippines. Our next session, we're looking at having 4. So for Singapore, China, Indonesia, and Malaysia. Let me walk you through a little bit about how they work. So you'll select a facilitator. You're going to do a brief round of introductions, and you'll talk about, what are some of the opportunities discussed today that are most worth pursuing in your country? What are some of the opportunities you think need to be further discussed, and maybe talk about some next steps? What are some ways perhaps that you as a group can stay together? This is really creating a space for stakeholders to connect and to collaborate around your country's agenda. If you're not participating in one of those breakouts, I just want to point out that we have some wonderful sessions coming up as part of our program. So we've got accountability and regulation. We're going to be going deeper into this question of what does it look like to build policy around AI for social good. And then we'll have a policy insights briefing specifically on governance, bringing some of the key insights across our sessions together. So these are a few things that you can expect next. I just want to leave a few of the social media sort of links that you can follow us on to keep in touch with the program and to continue taking part. We're very much looking forward, though, to having you as part of these sessions, and I want to thank our entire panel today for a really excellent discussion. Take care.